This is our episode number 4 of the JIT Radio, and I'm here solo dolo today, but not really. I have Michael. He's going to be our special guest today, and he is a just-in-time influencer. We can talk about that in the podcast. He's been a part of Just-in-Time for a while, and the reason why I thought he would be a great guest is because he is like one of the masters in creativity, and today's episode is about how can we unleash creativity and use it to cope with stress and to express ourselves.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Omar. It's super lit. Yeah, I'm here for all of that, and that's what I live about. I like to say my mission statement, if I've told you, is at the highest levels I aim to express my creativity and to help others do the same. So to whatever extent I can do that, that's what I'm here for.
Sweet. So that was your mission in life, is to help others through your creative experiences.
Precisely. Yeah, whatever
and
it
that
takes.
Is music. So tell us a little bit about what you do. So how do you express your creativity?
Yeah, I'm a musician. I do vocals and songwriting. I'm a photographer, a videographer, and I do graphic design. And thus far, I like to stay in those lanes because you can get lost in it, you know? There's so much to do where it helps to focus. But yeah, those are like the main points.
Out of all those, is there one that you feel strongest in, or like you like the most?
I think the external feedback I get the most is within music. I think that's because that's where I started with music, and I have what I feel is like a lack of like big cohesive projects to really share when it comes to the other things. Yet photography would come second, I think, because it's the next up in terms of content that I have, and I've won some little awards and stuff with the very few cohesive photo projects that I have. So I like to think everything, really, but yeah, I think music, photo, maybe graphic design, then video thus far.
Okay, so tell me more about the Wrote You a Letter project.
That package, Wrote You a Letter, came from, like, I used to write letters to people when I was like feeling very emotional, and to sort of deal with having those hard, embarrassing, high stakes conversations, deep conversations, emotional ones. And I don't write those letters anymore, but I make music. So I figured I had to incorporate that into the music, and I came up with that title, Wrote You a Letter.
When did your creativity start? Like, when did you know, like, no, I'm going to start exploring this side of myself? Like, how old were you? What's the first thing that ignited, like, creativity? I'm really curious about that.
Yeah. It's hard to say what really ignited it. I feel like it's almost always just been there, but I never explored it. So I think tracing that back, it starts all the way like when I was about 4, when I was in foster care with my aunt, and my her son, my oldest cousin, who is like a Stanford graduate and everything, he always encouraged me to do like reach higher towards like these STEM typically fields. What I picked up on was architecture, because I think that was in lieu of like being a foster youth. I had always looked for spaces that made me feel good, and that's why architecture stood out and is a way of me expressing how I feel and changing the way I feel via creative endeavors. So the first thing I picked up on was architecture. Then as I like continue to go through life, I think I hit 6, and then people would always tell me like, "You're a little philosopher, aren't you?" Because I'd always be trying to like get out of doing work and like create creative excuses to get out of work. So they told me I need to be a philosopher, and again, like a creative way of expressing myself. And I had learned like it's when I was 7 what psychology was, and how like that's the field where you really work on changing one's mind and how they feel and what they think. So, and it sort of relates to philosophy in that way. So I picked up on that. I had started like, I had been jealous of those kids who would always draw things too. And I would try to draw, but never to this day have not become an illustrator. So I'm like, yeah, I gotta find more ways to express myself, and I think that's at the base of everything, just finding ways to express myself. In middle school, he went to the 99-cent store, and they had these little notebooks that were like news reporter notebooks, like a little pen, and then they had like labeled out like the stories and everything. And I remember like walking around like, what'd you do today? Like, how you guys feeling today? And to write them down for like a span of a week. I did that. And I love how that little news reporter plays into me doing my podcast now and such, this documentary work that I want to work on. Then going into high school my freshman year, I had started in a digital photography class. And the first 3-4 weeks were just technical stuff, as you know, with cameras. There's a lot of technical stuff that goes into most of the digital art things. So we were learning those foundations. And I'm like, what? I want to take pictures. Like, where are the pictures at? And that really, like, turned me off to doing art, too. I'm like, this is not what I'm in it for, and everyone wants to teach me these things. And so soon after that, I dropped out of high school and was just existing. And
So I know today's topic was about creativity and the different components of it, but you know what? I cannot get out of my head like the part when you shared that you were not in school. The photography class just like was the final straw. So and then you added to that you know you were involved in drugs. How did you come out of that? And like what made you think, you know what, I need to go back to school? And I need to not do this anymore. So I'm just curious, like, how did you come out of that space?
I think one thing that helped is that I never stopped tinkering with these ideas. They would always change, like entrepreneurs. Like I would be sleeping on the floor, rats running around, people overdosing in the same house I'm living in, and I'm still like, oh, I should like increase my sales skills so I could really make money. I never gave up on my ability to make it out of there, I think is the first thing. It's hard to say whether it be, I'll just say we had a close friend who overdosed in that house and passed away. And that sort of was the beginning of the end for that place because police got involved, people left, disappeared, and everything. And I was still faced with the question, what am I going to do? So I never stopped working to answer that question. I never fed in too much to what the people around me were doing because it was just ugly. And yeah, I think I'm fortunate enough to have that all happen. I'm unfortunately fortunate enough to have that happen. Yeah,
That's interesting. So you were involved in these like not so good places and not so good times, but in the back of your head, like I got to keep working on this set of skill and like how do I, even if you, it's very interesting how you were still conscious about like, I need to get out of this place.
Yeah, they say you never fail until you give up, right? Until you stop. So the fact I was like, I may have been doing drugs myself, may have like given in to like spent so much time wasted, but I never gave up on. I never gave up and I never stopped on trying to improve myself or trying to find the next thing that would get me to the ultimate place I wanted to be. So in that sense, I never failed. I was never failing because there's always something there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for sharing. Yeah, that's very important to, find that something that could motivate you to keep going. And for you, it was to just keep learning and keep teaching others.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's funny too, even in those environments, everyone would be sitting around high on whatever they were high on. And I'd still be trying to teach something, like, inebriated, like, did you know? Like,
Michael the philosopher.
Yeah. It really came out very esoterically during that time. Circle back 7 years later from that photography experience and dropping out. Now I'm in college going to school for these things. And I'm like excelling in the photography and I'm working in photography. I'm starting to freelance and build my business in that. And that's where we are now, doing all of these projects that I like picked up and dropped. And I think I want to add to that dropping aspect. I think that just highlights me dropping things that, like, these things I'm doing now, the things that are the most fulfilling things I've ever done in my life, were things that I had in me since I was a kid. And that is something I like often talk to people about, those who are really lost in where they're going to go, like especially in higher education. I encourage them to look back at those things they wanted to do as a kid and really assess, like, why are you not doing those things? Me, it was because, for a few reasons, like, one, I couldn't find myself. I couldn't find how I would even accomplish these things. I would look at art and not understand it, like, not understand how people make money. Oh, starting off, like, how do I do it, right? Like, how do I take a good picture? How do I make a good song or a significant song? How do I, why would I sit down and talk with somebody in a podcast? Like, what impact can come out of that? But I continue to ask myself those questions. And the more I asked, the more answers that came up. And once I had enough of those answers, it became inevitable. Like, I have to do these things, which took a lot of time. It took a lot of help from mentors who would point me in the right directions and sort of give me the permission to do these things despite what the world's saying. And that's another thing that I think held me back, is like, the world always tells creatives and artists, like, you're not going to make money doing this. Like, you're going to have the hardest time. It's only like 0.01% of people make it in doing this, which might look right in terms of the numbers, but it boils down to people who are willing to put in the work and not just do fun stuff, but like do something that's impactful and has a purpose. And that's what it takes. And I figured that out. I'm like, if that's the case, I can do that. Especially if I notice most people aren't. Like, those are the people I'm competing with. Like, I can do it.
Mm. So, like, from what I heard, your creativity, or your where you are now with creativity was a combination of a lot of different experiences you had as a little kid. You had your cousin who was an architect and kind of inspired you, or not an architect. Sorry, he was in school, but he inspired you to look into architecture. And then you had the little notebook kit, which is kind of not really artsy related, but it's like storytelling, right?
No, precisely.
So now there was two things I wanted to ask you. One is, what was your dream career like when you were a little kid? Right, that's one question. And the other question is just a clarifying question. You said you dropped out of the photography school, or you dropped out of high school entirely?
High school. And it was that photography class that really, really pushed me over the edge, because it was the thing, like, I wanted the most. And the fact I had one of the worst experiences with it, I'm like, none of this is for me, sort of thing.
So like, the photography class experience was the last straw. Like, okay, pretty much, if I don't like this class, I'm just not going to do education at all, type of thing.
Pretty much. Okay,
interesting. Okay, so going back to when you were little, what was your dream career?
It was all of those things at different times. I've always wanted, like, hopped from thing to thing. I mean, at this point now, my answer to that question is all of those things are my dream career. But as I was going through, like I said, it was psychology, architecture, photography. When I realized I couldn't illustrate, I'm like, photography seems like a good route to go. Then actually during high school, there was also child developmental psychology, which was a class that I took that really changed my life. It was the most life-changing, like, thing I've ever done up to that point, especially. And so psychology became it. It was like me trailing back to 7-year-old me, where I had still gone through all of this trauma, and that class helped me to cope with a lot of what I went through. And I decided that I would use that as a tool to give back and to heal and be healed by, which still like pertains to my mission statement today. Like I want to express my creativity to the highest levels and help other people do the same. It's changed from psychology, but it still is really at the end of the day. So, and I was starting at college that time, so I had a full, going full time. So I had these classes. The only one I actually wanted to do work in was my Film 101 class, like film history. And I just loved it. I wanted to do it, actually. So I was really burning out. I was about to drop out and about to quit that job. And I was sleeping in my car at that time, sleeping in the office, my office at that time. And I'm like, I can't let that happen. I can't let this continue to go down. So, like, I took that leap of faith, looking at the one thing I was doing that I actually wanted to do, which was film. And so I switched to being a film major despite all the things the world might tell a creative professional. And that started my upwards track of where I'm going now. In the my goal now being creative direction, incorporating multiple things. But that track started with like making that decision for film specifically.
Interesting. That's very interesting. Because I feel like when you're sharing all these things, I feel like I'm like reliving my own story, because there's this very similar things that I experienced, like the architecture dream. When I was little, I also like wanted to be an architect. I remember like I was actually in the back of a truck with my family in El Salvador, and my mom was there, my cousins were there, and my one of my aunts was there, and she asked my mom, I forget how we were talking about like careers or whatever, and I just told my aunt like I want to be an architect when I grow up. So it's just very interesting how like your upbringing just like, kind of resonates with like how I grew up, which is interesting. But I'm very curious too. Like, okay, so you took this class of photography. I keep wanting to ask, like, what happened? Like, what did you do when you dropped out? Did you work? Where did you go? What were you doing between those times?
Drugs and hanging out. Yeah, I was living in what we had called the trap house.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't the best thing for me, but that's what I was doing.
I was just curious, like, because I didn't go to school either. I didn't go to school either. I didn't go to high school at all. So, like, what I did, I ran away from my foster home when I was like in 8th grade. So I didn't get to finish 8th grade, and we went to TJ, went to Mexico, and I was just like hiding, to be honest with you. And then I came back here like when I was 16, and I just started working. But I know I didn't want to I didn't want to work like at fast food restaurants. So I eventually went to school, and I'm here like helping others, which is like, I don't think I'm working most of the time because I get to like help out others, and I get to see others grow and get like resources. So you've had the dream of being creative, and how have you used that to like cope with stress?
That is a good question. I'm in therapy too, on and off with the same therapist when I need it, and a lot of the practices that we do within therapy involve me digging into what I'm thinking and adjusting that, and having exercises that just relieve stress, that make me feel productive and fulfilled. So all of that I sort of look to do in art, whether I'm communicating a message like through a graphic design, and I complete that and I'm fulfilled by that. And it's a whole lot of that. Like, I would do projects that at the end I feel much more fulfilled with, and it justifies spending all that time doing them, and also fuels me moving forward and making a career out of this. So I think that's the case.
Do you find it more relieving when you're actually creating, or the final result when you get to see and people are like, oh, that's a really good piece?
All of it, which is ideal, right? I don't want it to be just one of those things, you know? I don't want to have fun making something and then at the end be like, now I get to throw it in the trash, sort of thing. But yeah, I think, a lot of creative process is like digging into what you're thinking I was talking with an artist who makes a living doing abstract art yesterday, and he brought up some of the practices they do in abstract art, which like minimalistic abstract art. They take, and I did exercises like this in my graphic design class. We started with a prompt like you can use 5 of the same size circles and now make something that makes someone feel or see playfulness or structure or balance or imbalance. So it's like, what? Like, I have to use these circles to like communicate this message, sort of thing. But you really, in processes like that, dig into like what you're thinking and how you're feeling, and you have the ability to change that for others and help others through that. I think it's more digested, that message, in something like a film where you can really get to somebody. I know, like, my favorite films, one of them being like Spirited Away. You can see like a little pin I have up here with the soot sprite. It's one of these. I think it's covered up. Anyways, like that film, when I was 7 and almost had nearly just came out of foster youth and back to my parents, which I wouldn't say was a good thing because there's a lot of domestic violence and such going on. Yeah, a lot. And Spirited Away, like the main character, she loses her parents to like this spell, and she goes on this journey of like confusion in this world with her mission of like getting her parents back. And I related with her, that character, so much in the film, and I use that as a way to cope during that time and find tools to maintain myself, like my own peace, wading through that like that confusing world. And so I think it's being able to absorb and express things like that, like stories like that, content, whatever it be like that, that can impact you and somebody else so strongly, is like an ultimately fulfilling thing to me.
That's powerful, dude. You went from like, using creativity to de-stress or cope with things to like creating something where it's helping others as well.
And I think it goes back and forth, like rising tides raise all ships, sort of thing. Like if you and I are working together and I help you to grow, it's hard for you not to help me to grow back, sort of thing. And it's all for the better of the world, right? At the end of the day. Mm-hmm. But on like a grounded level, like if we're working together, we're helping each other raise up. Yeah, so it's like me helping you is really helping myself. Me helping myself is really helping you, sort of thing. I want to grow, so that's what I'm gonna do, to help others grow.
Yeah, you're very natural at that, because whenever at every project that we work on, I've worked on with you together, is like, oh, you do, like you're a natural teacher, and a lot of people are not like that. Like they're very like envious, or like they're very secretive, like how they do things. So that is like a cool trait that you have, where you are a teacher and you're like open to sharing like tips and tricks. Because it does get competitive with, like, especially like photography, and especially now, like everyone is on their phone taking pictures, and so it gets very competitive and very like no one really wants to share their tips. But you're like the quite opposite. And whenever I ask, oh, how do you take a picture like that? Oh, I did this and that. And like, oh, I heard it all, but I didn't understand any of it. So what I'm trying to say is that you have a natural. You're like a natural tendency to like teach others, and you're all about like, it goes back to like your mission statement, like helping others. And even though it's not a piece or a product, like your persona is someone who wants to build people up.
Yeah, and I think part of that teaching aspect for me comes from being like a perpetual student as well, where there's also that quote where they say, if like you can also learn by teaching. And when I realized that at a very young age, I was like, oh, I'm going to teach as much as I can so I can learn as much as I can beyond what I'm already learning. If I say learn the foundations of using the camera, which at the beginning is a lot that goes into it, I can really solidify those things that I learned that day in class by helping someone else to learn it that day. Like, I'm rerunning all those mental circuits that create what I have learned and strengthen them by teaching somebody else. So I think that's one like technical, tangible thing of where I started with teaching. But I think like there's a lot that goes into that for me, being like I've been interested in psychology, being that that's one of my mission statements at the highest intention. Yes.
So it's very interesting that you actually like sat down and wrote your mission statement.
Again, I wanted to do so many of these creative things, but didn't have a way to incorporate 80% of them. And so I really had to sit down and create that goal. And I found the goal with help of one of my mentors, who at this point wasn't a mentor. She was just some professor I had just met. And I asked her, like, what position, because she's done big things. I'm like, what position would someone have that incorporates all of these different things? And she told me a creative director would do that. And come to find out, art director would do that too. And so I'm like, okay, that's my new goal, to be or acquire the skills of a creative director. And I think I had to find a way to justify that, to communicate to people why that is the case. And that's where my mission statement came in, that intention. At the highest levels, I aim to express my creativity and help others do the same. And that statement considers and incorporates all of these things that I want to do within that one sentence. And that's why it sticks with me so much to this day, because with that one sentence, it's like my life's purpose.
So would you recommend that people sit down and reflect on what their values are and really lay down what their mission?
Yeah, for sure. Like if you're a just-in-time participant, I encourage you to attend those goal-setting workshops. Come stop by and ask for Scott. I don't know if he would want me to say that, to have a bunch of people coming in.
He loves talking about goal setting.
Yeah, that's his part of his mission statement. His life purpose is to help people who are driven to do whatever they want to do, and who need help in that area.
I was just thinking when you were saying all that, do you think there's two kinds of people in this world, people who are creative and people who are not?
I think on these lines, there's sort of two ways of how people think about the world. There's one type of person who sees the world as this structured thing. Like if they have a map, like they're the people who go see that there's a mountain here, so they put that mountain on their map. And that's how they go about the world, creating a map based on how they see, like, what is there. That's most people, I think. On the other hand, there's people who I think are more like me, who they're much more rare, who see these things and are almost crazy because they see the things to put on the map, but they put it in their own way that it doesn't look like how the outside world is, but they structure it. To them, it's more like, okay, I'm going to take that I've learned and see how it fits into my equation of how I view life.
Okay, so there's people who just look at life how take it as is type of thing, and there's others who are like, how can I transform that to look different or feel different or to be easier to understand? Like to your analogy of the map, like maybe, you know, people would just, there'd be the type of person who would just draw whatever they see, but someone like you who's creative, like, how can I make this hill look like a hill on the map, right? So now you draw like maybe shades or something.
And see, it's gonna fly over people's heads because it's hard for them to think that way. But it's also a dangerous way to think because you can literally you run the risk of sounding insane or stupid, right? And but it's also can be very impactful. I think the most impactful people who have existed on this planet think that way. They, like a Martin Luther King, like he existed in a world where his people were oppressed, and that is the way that things were. If he was someone who thinks like how most people think, things would have stayed that way. He wouldn't have spoken out and up and offered different ways of viewing things. But it was because he's someone who someone who had a dream and was driven and intentional enough to fulfill that vision that he and very few people had, that he created the impact that he has. So it can be a very powerful thing as well. And I think of that analogy of like an entrepreneur, someone who jumps off of a cliff and then builds the plane on the way down, like is more of like a palatable form of saying that. Where it also illustrates how sort of crazy you have to be someone who makes a big change.
Okay, thank you for putting it that way, because one, it takes someone to have a vision, and then the second part of being creative is like actually manifesting your vision. Because like you mentioned, like Martin Luther King had a dream, but he could have just kept that dream inside his head, right? Mm-hmm. But he took it a step further and like made it reality and started speaking up and became an activist and this and that. So like there's like two steps in the creativity process. Is one, you look at things a certain way, you have a vision, you visualize things. The second step to that is like building something out of it or making it a reality. Mm-hmm. Interesting. So what about those who want to be creative and they feel like they cannot be creative? So what would you tell someone who's wanting to either express themselves or are looking to be more creative? What would your advice be to them?
I would say, especially based on what you just mentioned, like there being those two steps of having a vision, of just say vision and execution. I would clarify that I wouldn't call them steps in like a linear process, because there's you can move effectively and grow starting with taking action and then refining your vision. I think to keep those two things in mind and experiment with those as well. Everything you hear about success, keep those in mind and be willing to think and act outside of the box. I think especially if you have your intentional goal and mission statement and values and all those aligned, those help to point you in the right direction, so that when you're taking these actions and building these visions, they're actually something sustainable. Whereas if you take action and build visions with something that is not really based on your values, but it might just sound cool, it's not something that's going to sustain you like emotionally or mentally or spiritually for too long. So that's why it really does help to have something like a goal and a mission statement and your values aligned and in mind. But I'd say, yeah, a lot of exploring. Me, when like illustrating that process that I took in education, where I decided to drop psychology and move to film. Like, you have to be willing to sound crazy like that to somebody. Like, you're going to do, like, the hardest thing that there is to do? Like, yes, because I have this goal in mind, and till death do me part, I'm going to make it happen. And it went even deeper because I realized that, again, like, not all of my values were being fulfilled. So I had to go and explore more. They're like, oh, not only are you taking a step back from psychology to film, but you're now going to try to do like 3 or 4 more creative things, you're never going to make it. Well, I know I am, because I have all of these things in mind, and I'm taking intentional, determined action towards achieving those things. And I know it's sustainable because it's like I've accounted all my values and goals and skill sets and incorporate that in the work I do. So a whole lot of it is experimentation. But then again, more of those things you always hear about success, find mentors. Like I have a whole, if I think about the added experience between all the mentors I have, who are people who are at the places and around the people who I aspire to become, like it's hundreds of years of experience that I have, like supporting me. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants in that sense. Like that's another thing that helps me immensely. It is some of these, like my film professor is one who really encourages exploration. He's like, if you're a creative person, you need to know this. Oops. He asks me, he's like, I know a world-renowned violinist. What do you think someone who wants to hire her asks her before they hire her? What do you think that question is?
I would say, are you available to play next Sunday at a certain time? I'll ask for her availability first.
That's a good point. That's a good point. But I think before that, you might ask, can you play the violin? Can you do what we need you to do? Sort of thing. So that's all people really care about in the creative industry if you're working to
produce or
do something professional in that. Can you do what we need you to do? I don't care about a piece of paper that you have, because that doesn't let me know that you can do what I need you to do. So that's another tip I've learned in that note. And in lieu of adding what might help someone who's looking to do something creatively, or a few things. Yeah.
Well, Michael, I really appreciate you sharing all of this and how you're creative, and I hope people who are listening get inspired and become creative.
You just check out my stuff, because if you found something impactful in this, like I continue to try to, I won't want to say try. What I do is continue conversations like this to deliver more impact to people. So I don't like just promote myself just to promote myself. I promote myself to promote anyone who's tuning in. So, yeah.
Well, there you go. You heard it. If there's anything that stuck out to you listening to this episode, whether it's about creativity, about artist therapy, about film, photography, Michael is your go-to guy. Even you want to go deeper in any conversation, Michael is your go-to guy.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.